Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are mapping out a truly fascinating and honestly pretty esoteric theory from our source material. We're going to take our standard earthly perspective and just blow it up to a massive universal scale to answer some of the absolute biggest questions about human existence. It all starts with one fundamental question. Why on earth do human races and religions endlessly clash? I mean, for centuries, we've struggled with ideological and racial divisions, right? It's literally the ultimate historical mystery. Why, despite all our technological and social advancements, can't we not just seem to coexist peacefully? Historians and philosophers have been banging their heads against the wall over this forever. But the material we're looking at today offers an explanation that completely bypasses traditional geopolitics. To explore this highly unconventional answer, we're diving into a text by Ryuho Okawa called Messages from Outer Space Part 2. And this book proposes a vast cosmic-scale answer to this very terrestrial problem of conflict. So instead of looking at, borders drawn on a map or historical grievances between nations, this source suggests the actual root of our earthly friction originates way, way beyond our own atmosphere. We'll be focusing heavily on Chapter 1, titled The Space Age and the Truth of Buddhist Teachings. This opening chapter establishes the foundational premise of our source. Humanity is actually formed by souls that were specifically invited here from various other planets to understand the secrets of universal creation. Okay, so this requires a pretty dramatic shift in how we view ourselves, a sort of massive cosmic zoom out. According to the text, what we perceive as these deep-seated earthly differences, our clashing cultures, the different religious dogmas, the racial tensions, they are actually just the surface-level results of incredibly diverse, deeply ingrained extraterrestrial value systems. Basically, we aren't just bumping heads because we live on different continents. We're clashing because, spiritually speaking, we come from entirely different worlds. The mechanics of this theory actually follow a very specific three-step sequence. Step 1, souls were actively invited to Earth from all across the cosmos. Step 2, these diverse souls then incarnated into physical bodies, which became the various human races spread across our globe. And Step 3, and this is absolutely crucial, a kind of collective amnesia sets in. These incarnated souls literally forget their cosmic origins. And this profound forgetfulness is exactly what breeds our earthly ideological conflicts. We've completely forgotten that we're a cosmic melting pot, so we end up fighting over differences we no longer understand. Just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of these clashing ideologies, the source actually catalogs a massive variety of extraterrestrial beings that are currently incarnated as humans, just walking among us. This cosmic genealogy includes reptilians, vegans, Dogons, Pleiadians, Venusians, and even Martians. The text asserts that each and every one of these groups brings a totally unique, planet-specific set of values and spiritual inclinations to Earth, just dumping them all into one shared earthly environment. So let's break down exactly what those differing values actually look like according to the source. Take the reptilians, for example. The text describes this specific group as possessing a value system fundamentally rooted in the principle of evolution. Their core ideology, brought directly from their home star system, centers heavily on competition, survival, and continuous evolutionary progression. When you think about the intense, cutthroat competition we see all the time in human society, whether it's in business or politics, you can kind of start to see how injecting a highly competitive, evolution-driven soul group into the mix might create some serious friction. Now contrast that highly competitive nature with the vegans. The text outlines a completely different spiritual signature for this group. The source links vegan souls heavily to the concepts of miraculous healing. Fascinatingly, the book even has a section claiming that Jesus was resurrected within a spaceship, directly associating this miraculous event with souls of vegan origin. So right there, you have an ideology based on miraculous salvation and healing sitting directly next to that reptilian ideology of competitive evolution. Talk about a recipe for misunderstanding, right? Meanwhile, we've got the Pleiadians. The text characterizes these beings as cosmic space merchants. Their intrinsic nature is heavily tied to trade, exchange, and interaction. But the book also suggests that their presence and influence are intertwined with ongoing earthly ethnic and religious disputes. When you have fundamentally different groups, some driven by evolution, some by miracles, some by cosmic commerce, and all of them have entirely forgotten where they came from, well, intense misunderstanding and conflict are pretty much the inevitable earthly results. Moving on to Chapter 5, The Significance of Dialogues with Aliens. The The text suggests that the very purpose of uncovering these space readings is to finally understand these hidden differences so we can actually begin resolving our earthly conflicts. But as the author argues, merely identifying these differences just isn't enough. I mean, simply pointing out that we are fundamentally different doesn't magically create peace, right? The ultimate solution proposed by the text is the establishment of what it calls a unified law of the universe. This is presented as a necessary, overarching cosmic framework. Its entire purpose is to harmonize and organize these vastly different and sometimes completely contradictory extraterrestrial value systems so they can finally function together. So the overarching goal here is pretty clear. On one side of the coin, we have our current state of fragmented extraterrestrial values, which is resulting in all these earthly conflicts. On the other side is the proposed solution. The text emphasizes that harmonizing this sheer chaos of 1,000 different planetary mindsets requires bringing them all under one absolute universal truth, which it ultimately aligns with fundamental Buddhist teachings. It's really all about organizing this huge amount of diverse cosmic noise into actual spiritual harmony. Now, the text definitely acknowledges that this is no small feat. Unlocking the secret of Earth's diversity and actually organizing these deeply ingrained cosmic values into a completed law of the universe is a monumental task. The source notes that this process is going to require profound understanding, immense effort, and most importantly, time. It's a slow, painstaking process of spiritual diplomacy on a literal cosmic scale, which really mirrors the exact challenges we face in our own earthly attempts at international diplomacy. As this explainer wraps up, we want to leave you with a question to ponder based on everything we've just unpacked. If humanity's roots truly do lie in the stars, as this text vehemently argues, how will acknowledging this cosmic genealogy change our future here on Earth? If we start reframing our terrestrial conflicts not as localized hatreds but as a massive cosmic misunderstanding, it could fundamentally alter the trajectory of human history. It's a vast, staggering perspective on exactly who we are and why we fight. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating source material.
All right, let's dive right in. Welcome to today's explainer. We are unpacking a completely fascinating concept today, pulling from a really extraordinary source text that details spiritual dialogues with extraterrestrial souls. We're going to be exploring what the text describes as this profound cosmic juxtaposition. In esoteric lore, we hear all these established stereotypes about certain alien species. But our source material today completely flips one of the biggest ones right on its head. It introduces us to something you'd probably never expect, a herbivore reptilian. It's just a brilliant look at how, even across the cosmos, identity might be way more complex than we ever assumed.
So, can a reptilian actually be a pacifist? If you're familiar at all with these kinds of extraterrestrial narratives, you already know that reptilians are pretty much universally depicted as aggressive, conquering, fiercely competitive beings. They're basically framed as the ultimate cosmic predators. Yet the text we're examining today presents a detailed spiritual dialogue that immediately challenges that whole aggressive stereotype. We're going to look at the specific account of a soul who completely defies her own species' fierce reputation.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Unlocking past alien memories. 2. The peaceful herbivore reptilian. 3. Horns, tails, forked tongues. 4. Life as a Buddhist nun. 5. The principle of evolution. And finally, 6. A beautiful reptilian future.
Section 1. Unlocking past alien memories. A hidden past revealed.
To really grasp the weight of this narrative, we need to understand the unique setup presented in our source material. The book impartially documents a spiritual reading conducted with a present-day female staff member. And, according to the text, this session unlocked her hidden spiritual lineage, revealing that her soul actually originated from Centaurus Beta. So, the conversation that unfolds, which is the whole basis of our explainer today, is presented as a direct dialogue with this extraterrestrial soul speaking right through her present-day human incarnation. It's this fascinating framework that lets us explore these massive cosmic perspectives through a really grounded human lens.
Moving on to Section 2, the peaceful herbivore reptilian, a cosmic dichotomy.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it brings the core contrast of our source text into sharp focus. On one side, we have the carnivore reptilians. These are the ones who align with all that standard lore we talked about. They're aggressive, they actively promote fierce competition, and they definitely view themselves as conquerors. But on the flip side, our subject places herself firmly in the herbivore category. She describes herself as completely peace-loving. Instead of conquering, she actively seeks integration and harmony. And most profoundly, the text highlights her deep belief in God's love. She literally has no interest in domination. She's entirely focused on spiritual coexistence.
Section 3. Horns, tails, forked tongues. Her physical traits.
Okay, so we've established her peaceful nature, but we absolutely have to talk about her physical reality back on Centaurus Beta. Because she wasn't some ethereal, soft-glowing humanoid. According to the text, her original physical traits included a horned head, a heavily scaled lizard-like body, a thick, powerful crocodile-like tail, and a forked or two-pronged tongue. I mean, these are undeniably fearsome attributes. If you ran into this being, your first instinct would probably be absolute terror. Yet housed right inside this intimidating, predatory exterior is the soul of a gentle, peace-seeking herbivore. Talk about not judging a book by its cover, right? Even on a galactic scale.
Section 4. Life as a Buddhist nun. A spiritual journey.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because you have to wonder, how does a horned, lizard-like being from Centaurus Beta end up navigating life on Earth? Well, it's an incredible chronological journey. She begins on Centaurus Beta. Then, roughly 1,000 years ago, she makes this conscious decision to migrate to Earth. But get this, step 3 is where it gets truly wild. When incarnating on Earth, she didn't choose the life of a warlord or a powerful emperor. The source text reveals she actually lived a past life as a Buddhist nun. Just think about that for a second. A soul from a famously aggressive alien species consciously chooses a life dedicated entirely to asceticism, meditation, and peace in a Buddhist temple. And this ultimately leads her to her present-day incarnation as an ordinary female staff member, just quietly continuing her spiritual evolution right here among us.
Section 5. The Principle of Evolution. Reframing Strength.
Now you might be wondering, does she just completely reject her whole reptilian heritage? Well, according to the source text, no, she doesn't. The text defines this core reptilian philosophy called the Principle of Evolution. In its rawest form, this principle is all about the rigorous pursuit of strength, survival, and continuous, almost ruthless growth. It's literally the engine that drives her species. And despite her peaceful nature, she actually acknowledges this drive within herself. She hasn't discarded it, she still values strength and growth, but she has entirely reframed what strength actually means.
So the crucial point is that instead of using her inherent drive for physical domination or some kind of galactic conquest, she redirects it. The source material explains she desires to channel this intense pursuit of strength directly towards spiritual evolution. She takes that relentless reptilian energy and uses it to fiercely pursue integration with Earthlings and to aggressively seek a deeper understanding of God's love. It's such a masterful reconciliation. She's basically using an alien survival instinct to power human spiritual empathy.
Section 6. A beautiful reptilian future. A cosmic rebranding.
Our subject isn't just hanging out here on Earth for a personal vacation. She actually has this profound, overarching mission. The source material explicitly states her grand desire is creating an image of a bright and beautiful reptilian. She is painfully aware of the dark, terrifying reputation her species holds, both across the cosmos and in our own earthly esoteric traditions. So, her goal is essentially a cosmic rebranding campaign. By living a life of peace, seeking spiritual truths, and bridging the gap between Centaurus Beta and Earth, she hopes to reshape that entire narrative. She wants to prove, once and for all, that reptilians can be harmonious, constructive, and fundamentally beautiful beings. I really want to leave you with this thought to ponder. We've just explored the fascinating account of a horned, crocodile-tailed being who migrated across the stars to study Buddhism and promote God's love. So if, according to this source material, even the most traditionally fearsome cosmic beings harbor souls that desperately seek peace and integration, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for the future of Earth and how we view the other, whether that other is someone across the street or a species across the galaxy? It is a beautiful, provocative question to carry with you today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the universe around you. Everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. You know, we spend a lot of time taking fascinating, completely out-of-the-box source materials and breaking them down into clear insights. And today, well, we are looking at a truly unique piece of literature. It literally reimagines one of the absolute foundational events in human history. We're going to examine a published interview with an alleged extraterrestrial entity, and as always, we're just impartially unpacking the text to really understand its profound and, let's be honest, highly unusual claims about our past.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because we really have to ask, what if the greatest miracle in history was actually a covert extraterrestrial rescue mission?
I mean, that is the explosive central premise of the text we're analyzing today. The source material basically asks us to completely suspend our traditional understanding of the ancient world. It's proposing that the pivotal events of antiquity weren't driven by divine magic or even just human hands, but by highly advanced beings operating entirely behind the scenes. So it frames the ancient world not as some primitive era, but as an active intervention zone for cosmic entities.
So the text we're drawing from today is a published book known as Messages from Outer Space. It's a work that's deeply rooted in esoteric spiritual histories, dealing heavily with alleged extraterrestrial interviews and channeled entities. It essentially attempts to rewrite conventional history by introducing alien races, like the Pleiadians, the Reptilians, and others, as key players in Earth's development. Now, our goal today isn't to debate the reality of these claims, not at all. We just want to map out the fascinating internal logic of the book's narrative, specifically focusing on its most startling historical rewrite.
To do exactly that, we are jumping straight into Chapter 3. The title translates to The Vegan Who Resurrected Jesus. And yes, before you ask, that means an extraterrestrial being from the Vega star system, not someone who only eats a plant-based diet. In this chapter, the text presents an interview with a soul claiming to be directly responsible for orchestrating the central miracle of the Christian faith. It's a massive claim, obviously, so let's break down exactly who this entity is actually supposed to be.
Now, what's really interesting here is how incredibly specific the source text gets about the capabilities of these beings. According to the book, this entity originates from the Vega star system over in the Lyra constellation. The vegans are categorized as highly intelligent, but their defining characteristic in this whole narrative is their absolute mastery of advanced medical technology. They also allegedly possess the ability to transform their physical bodies totally freely, so essentially shape-shifting. Plus, the specific soul being interviewed is described as a complex body. This means it simultaneously holds two totally different types of alien souls. So this incredibly sophisticated shape-shifting medical expert is the exact lens through which the text asks us to view the events of the first century.
So the absolutely crucial point is how this entity supposedly intervened. The text lays out a timeline that honestly reads like a covert, cosmic detective story. It starts in the first century with the historical crucifixion of Jesus Christ. But rather than a spiritual transition, the text claims a secret intervention took place. The vegans covertly took the physical, executed body of Jesus right aboard their spacecraft. Once they had him secured, they utilized their advanced medical technology, specifically described in the text as the application of advanced healing rays, to physically revive the body. Finally, Jesus is returned to Earth perfectly healthy, which orchestrates the historic miracle we all know as the resurrection.
The text makes this incredibly blunt, staggering claim. They literally say they resurrected the executed Jesus inside a spaceship. I mean, it is a profound genre clash. We are so used to envisioning the biblical era with these pastoral images, right? Sandals, robes, stone tombs, just a very ancient, low-technology world. So to suddenly inject spacecrafts, stealth extraction missions, and medical healing rays into that exact same setting, it creates a striking visual and conceptual contrast. The source text just completely overrides mystical theology with high-tech science fiction.
And this brilliantly illustrates the fundamental shift the author is making here. Let's just compare the two interpretations side by side for a second. The traditional understanding frames the resurrection as this ultimate, divine, spiritual miracle, the Son of God demonstrating absolute spiritual power over physical death. But the source text claim, it reframes this entirely. It takes away the divine mystery and replaces it with a highly calculated technological procedure. In this version of history, the resurrection wasn't a triumph of the spirit, it was a triumph of vegan medical technology. It literally reduces a divine mystery to a highly successful alien medical procedure.
Now, naturally, this brings up the question of motive. Why would advanced beings from the Lyra constellation even care about an execution in first-century Judea? Well, the text outlines a very specific three-step mission. Step 1. The vegans rush to Earth and use their shape-shifting abilities to actually disguise themselves as disciples. Step 2. They use their advanced medical tech to perform what the locals perceived as miracles, like curing diseases. And Step 3, and really this is the ultimate goal here, they do all of this to protect the Savior and ensure the survival and expansion of Christianity into a global religion. According to the book, they were basically acting as cosmic guardians for Earth's spiritual development.
Let's move on and see how this builds, because get this incredible, high-tech rescue operation wasn't just an isolated incident. Nope, the text explicitly asserts that the vegans actually had a track record of doing this here on Earth. Which brings us to the Osiris connection. According to the text, thousands of years before the events in Judea, the vegans utilized this exact same life-restoring medical technology in ancient Egypt. They claim to have orchestrated the legendary resurrection of the Egyptian god Osiris. If you know the traditional myth, Osiris is murdered, his body is scattered, and he's magically put back together by the goddess Isis. But in the narrative of this text, that ancient myth was actually an early deployment of vegan healing rays and spacecraft intervention. The text is basically suggesting that all of our ancient stories of gods conquering death, they're actually just fragmented memories of extraterrestrial medical procedures.
And that leads us to our final thought for today. The source text we've explored is undeniably unconventional, right? It completely rewrites global religions through this highly specific sci-fi lens. But beyond the literal claims of vegans and spaceships, it forces us to ask a really deeply human question. Why do we continuously update our oldest myths with new, cosmic possibilities? Every generation seems to attempt to explain the unexplainable using the language and the concepts of their own era, whether that's magic, divine will, or in this case, advanced alien technology. Thanks so much for joining me in breaking down this fascinating text. Keep questioning the stories we're told, keep analyzing those sources, and I will see you in the next explainer.
Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be diving into a truly sweeping cosmic history from a wildly fascinating source text. It's a text that just seamlessly blends esoteric spiritualism, sci-fi lore, and some surprisingly deep ecological themes. Our goal today is to map out this highly unique narrative, step by step. And as always, we're keeping a perfectly objective lens here. We aren't taking sides, we're just exploring the incredible mythology the source material lays out for us.
Now let me hook you immediately by asking a pretty out there question. Did a real alien encounter actually inspire the massive Hollywood blockbuster movie Avatar? I mean, no way, right? Well, before you completely dismiss that, the source material we're examining today makes exactly that claim. It actually connects those famous blue-skinned aliens directly to the esoteric spiritual dialogue we're about to unpack.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Chapter 4 of our source text introduces us to a group called the Dogon, also referred to as the Blue Fox. The text outlines a channel dialogue with an entity from the Dogon star system, which is located over near Sirius. And according to this dialogue, these extraterrestrials, described as having a blue-skinned, almost fox-like appearance, served as the literal inspiration for the movie Avatar. It's a really fascinating pop culture connection right out of the gate. Part 1. Escaping the Reptilian Invasion. Let's move to the timeline and see how this all builds. This cosmic epic begins with their origins out in the stars. The Dogon star system near Sirius, to be exact, where they were supposedly living totally peacefully. But that peace gets violently disrupted by a massive invasion from a reptilian alien race. Forced into a desperate mass exodus, the Dogon entities had to flee across the cosmos, ultimately seeking refuge and establishing a brand new settlement right here on Earth. According to the dialogue, this extraterrestrial conflict is a foundational part of their history. The source explicitly claims their homeworld was ruthlessly invaded by these reptilians. By framing their arrival on Earth as the result of a literal cosmic refugee crisis, the material establishes a very dramatic, complex backstory for why these beings are currently here. Part 2. Dinosaurs and Divine Wrath. So, once they arrive on Earth, the text claims they bore witness to some pretty incredible events, including a highly sensational explanation for the dinosaur extinction. The text claims, and I'll quote this directly, "It wasn't a random accident of the cosmos, but a result of divine wrath brought about by a meteorite due to excessive propagation."
Let's break down that logic because it's super interesting. The physical cause of the extinction? Still a meteorite, but the why is entirely different here. The entity explains that the dinosaurs had essentially overpopulated the planet. So in this specific lore, that meteorite wasn't just a random piece of space rock, it was a targeted divine reset button pushed specifically in response to the dinosaurs' excessive propagation.
Part 3. Magic and Nature's Harmony. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the text draws a fascinating contrast between their physical and metaphysical forms. Physically, they have that animalistic, blue-skinned, blue fox appearance. But metaphysically, the text claims they possess incredibly strong psychic abilities and a profound magical affinity. It's a stark, completely unique combination of traits.
and all of those magical and psychic abilities are supposedly channeled into one supreme value: harmony with nature. The text emphasizes that they deeply, deeply value ecological balance over something like technological conquest. This philosophy is basically the essential thread connecting their cosmic refugee status, their escape from the aggressive reptilians, all the way to their ongoing presence on Earth.
Part 4. Modern Environmentalist Reincarnations.
According to the dialogue, these extraterrestrial souls didn't just hang out in the prehistoric past, they've been continually reincarnating throughout human history. The text actually identifies several nature-revering ancient civilizations as past incarnations of these Dogon souls, specifically pointing to the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Australian Aboriginals.
So, the crucial point is how this ancient harmony with nature manifests today. According to the text, their modern mission involves heavy involvement in global environmentalists and anti-nuclear movements. The source literally claims that the souls of these blue-skinned extraterrestrial refugees are actively incarnated today as leading voices fighting to protect Earth's ecology and opposing destructive, unnatural technologies.
It is just a wildly intricate narrative, weaving together Hollywood imagery, ancient history, and modern activism. Which really leaves us to ponder, how do alternative spiritual texts use sci-fi tropes and environmentalism to explain human history? Whether you view this as literal cosmic truth or just a fascinating allegory for climate anxiety, it beautifully illustrates how we blend ancient mysteries with modern fears to create one incredibly captivating story. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll catch you on the next one.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking something absolutely wild. We're diving into the cosmic roots of earthly conflict. Specifically, we're zeroing in on Chapter 5 of our source text, which pitches a, frankly, mind-bending, cosmos-spanning explanation for all the endless friction we see here on Earth. So, instead of just looking across our borders to figure out why we argue, the author is basically saying, hey, we need to be looking up at the stars. It is a super bold, totally captivating premise, and we're going to break down exactly how the text builds this argument.
So looking at the Chapter 5 index, it maps out this journey from an Okinawa UFO sighting all the way to interpersonal harmony. And the origin story of this whole theory? It's remarkably specific. The author mentions taking a standard trip back from Okinawa and just having a UFO sighting. Impartially speaking, it's absolutely fascinating how this text takes this deeply personal, kind of bizarre, random event and uses it as the launchpad for a massive spiritual theory. This wasn't cooked up in some academic think tank. It literally sparked from a glance out a window on a flight home.
Right, so this very grounded, personal anecdote acts as the mysterious catalyst here. For the author, seeing this UFO wasn't just some fleeting wow moment, it's framed as the exact spark that kicked off a whole series of profound extraterrestrial spiritual readings. It basically sets the stage for the book's biggest, most central assertion, which is, we absolutely cannot understand human history or human conflict without first understanding our cosmic neighbors.
Now you might be wondering, how far-reaching is this idea? Well, the text applies this framework to literally every single scale of conflict you can imagine. On a macro level, the source explicitly points to those massive, globe-shaking issues, think deep-seated ethnic conflicts, or the heavy religious friction between the US and the Middle East, these huge, history-making clashes. But then, on a micro level, it scales right down to those everyday, annoying interpersonal struggles we all deal with. Bickering with a coworker, arguing at home. The author's radical claim here is that whether nations are going to war or you're just snapping at a friend, the root cause, it's exactly the same.
And that brings us to this one, very bold quote, that really distills the whole thesis. The author writes, "Human conflicts are fundamentally rooted in the different planetary origins of human souls." I mean, let that sink in for a second. The proposed answer to literally all of our earthly friction, whether it's political, religious, or totally personal, is extraterrestrial. The text is arguing that we aren't just fighting over, say, land or resources or earthly politics. No, we're clashing because our souls literally originate from entirely different planets. Talk about a paradigm shift, right? It completely flips the human experience from a terrestrial one straight into a cosmic one.
Okay, so how exactly does this work? Let's break down the mechanics here based on what the source material tells us. The text lays out this really clear chain of cause and effect. It says that human souls actually retain the traits, the memories, and the natural inclinations from their original home planets. And because there are just so many different planetary origins out there, humans inherently end up with completely different core values. So it's kind of like a giant cosmic puzzle. When you force all these wildly diverse cosmic backgrounds to live together on one single planet, Earth, they're obviously going to clash. Therefore, according to the text, what we think of as deeply entrenched geopolitical or religious wars are, in reality, invisible extraterrestrial incompatibilities playing out on our visible earthly stage.
But here's the thing. The author doesn't just drop this massive cosmic problem in our laps and walk away. They actually offer a super specific 3-step blueprint to fix it. Step 1, acknowledge these alien backgrounds. We have to realize that, hey, we really aren't all the same under the surface. Step 2 is about cultivating what we could call cosmic empathy, basically genuinely respecting each other's diverse origins. If someone acts differently than you, it's not necessarily because they're a bad person. Maybe their soul just comes from a star system that plays by a completely different set of rules. And by mastering those first two, the author asserts we hit step 3, building genuine harmony and world peace. According to this framework, profound cosmic understanding is literally the key to ending both international wars and your everyday arguments.
Which really brings us to a super fascinating conclusion. We've traced this incredible narrative all the way from a totally random UFO sighting in Okinawa to a literal cosmic blueprint for world peace. Now, completely without endorsing the theology itself, you have to admit, it's undeniably a captivating way to look at the human condition. By framing our earthly differences as extraterrestrial diversity, the text really forces us to stop and ask, can looking to the stars finally help us understand each other right here on Earth? It's just such a bold perspective that reframes the chaos of our world into this vast interplanetary melting pot. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep asking questions and definitely keep exploring those fascinating ideas.
Let's dive right into something totally fascinating today. You know, we spend a lot of time on this explainer breaking down historical events and complex data, but right now, we're stepping into the wild, esoteric realm to decode what I call a cosmic resume. We're looking at a highly specific, super detailed profile of an extraterrestrial entity found in modern spiritual literature. And honestly, whether you look at this as literal truth, modern mythology, or just top-tier sci-fi world-building, the sheer level of detail here is absolutely captivating. It's this wild window into how esoteric texts blend space-age concepts with ancient human history.
So we're anchoring ourselves in Ryuho Okawa's book, Messages from Outer Space, and we are zooming in on Chapter 6. This section of the original Japanese text outlines an interview with a very specific soul originating from the Pleiades star system. The author presents this as a direct, spiritual channeling, not fiction. So we're going to take the claims from this chapter, extract the data, and build out a structured profile so we can really understand the narrative they're constructing.
To do that, we'll break this cosmic resume into 4 parts. Meet the Cosmic Traitor, the Ancient Security Treaty, cataloging alien spacecraft, and earthly reincarnations and disciples.
Okay, Section 1. Meet the Cosmic Traitor, a cosmic profession like no other.
Just take a second to appreciate the juxtaposition here, mixing mundane corporate terms with this epic cosmic existence. The text literally defines this entity as an interstellar trading company employee, right? Instead of some ethereal being just floating endlessly in the void, this Pleiadian is basically described as a cosmic logistics manager. The text points out that the Pleiades star system heavily emphasizes the concepts of love and development. So this entity's actual job is to facilitate the exchange of goods, vital resources, and crucial information between completely different star systems. It's just a really fascinating way to ground the vastness of space into a totally relatable, almost bureaucratic human framework.
But look, this job is definitely not just about moving space cargo. The text outlines some massive earthly impacts attributed to these beings, framing them as highly active participants in human affairs. They aren't just distant observers. The book notes this entity shares a home planet with a Pleiadian woman featured earlier in the text, giving us some nice universe continuity. Now, this traitor also claims that extraterrestrials are directly involved behind the scenes of Earth's ethnic conflicts and religious disputes, purportedly to guide human development. And on a surprisingly localized level, the text mentions this entity was actively exploring recruiting human candidates directly from the people of Okinawa, Japan. It paints Earth as this bustling frontier market for cosmic traders.
Moving on to Section 2, the Ancient Security Treaty, Earth's Interstellar Defense Pact.
According to the lore, this interstellar relationship is definitely not a recent development. The text explicitly states that roughly 7,000 years ago, which it fascinatingly aligns with the ancient Inca period, the Pleiadians and Earth signed a formal security treaty to defend the planet from malevolent forces. Again, we're seeing this incredible use of modern legal and political terminology applied to ancient mythology.
This was a binding, legalistic defense pact created specifically to protect a young, developing humanity.
And this sets up the central conflict beautifully. I mean, why did Earth even need a security treaty 7,000 years ago? Well, on one side, we have the Pleiadians, our interstellar traders acting as peacekeepers and cultural developers. On the other side is the stated threat, the Altair reptilians. The source material describes these beings as, and I quote, extremely ferocious, lizard-type reptilians originating from a companion star in the Altair system. So the text crafts this grand, binary cosmic drama, the refined, trade-focused Pleiadians stepping in to provide a literal security umbrella for Earth against violent, predatory forces.
Which brings us to Section 3, Cataloging Alien Spacecraft, the Pleiadian Fleet. If you've ever wondered why UFO sightings involve so many different shapes, this text actually offers a highly structured explanation for that. It categorizes the Pleiadian fleet into 3 distinct shapes based on function. The massive motherships, cigar-shaped. The medium transport or operational ships, submarine style. And the small, localized scouting ships are your classic dish shapes. It's literally an inventory list for signing out a company vehicle. By breaking down advanced alien tech into this neat, bureaucratic table, the author gives us a tangible understanding of how this cosmic trading company physically operates out there in the galaxy.
Okay, final section. Earthly reincarnations and disciples. Spiritual deployments on the ground. So the lore doesn't just keep this alien up in space. It weaves them directly into the fabric of human history through reincarnation. 7,000 years ago, they're in this cosmic military capacity, signing the treaty during the Inca period. But as humanity develops, their role completely shifts. During antiquity, the soul purportedly reincarnates on Earth to serve as a disciple of the legendary Hermes. Later in ancient India, the text claims they reincarnated to become a disciple of the Buddha. And, in a highly specific detail, their most recent past life was said to be in Germany, acting as a close friend who supported the great writer Goethe. This perfectly highlights the Pleiadian tendency to foster arts and culture while swooping in like a hero during crises. The timeline maps a deliberate shift from a military defender to a spiritually involved patron of earthly culture.
This single page from the original table of contents really says it all. It seamlessly transitions from discussing the shapes of motherships and lizard-type reptilians straight into claims of reincarnating as disciples of Hermes and Buddha. It's this stunning blend of sci-fi taxonomy and historical theology. Our goal in this explainer isn't to validate these claims, right? It's just to impartially highlight how this source meticulously links alternative extraterrestrial history with the foundational figures of major world religions.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on. Regardless of what you personally believe about this text, it forces us to ask, why do so many esoteric texts attempt to trace humanity's greatest spiritual milestones back to the stars? What is it about human nature and our search for meaning that drives us to look up at the night sky and see not just distant suns, but our spiritual ancestors, our interstellar protectors, and our cosmic trading partners? It's a real testament to the boundless nature of human imagination. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I will catch you in the next explainer.
Let's jump right into this explainer because today we're unpacking a cosmological narrative that is, honestly, just wild. We are tracing a single soul across space, across time, and through some completely different definitions of existence. Based on these specific spiritual readings, we're looking at a journey spanning hundreds of millions of years. It really challenges everything we think we know about history, reincarnation, and identity. So, if you've ever wondered how an ancient alien ideal might theoretically map onto human history, you're going to absolutely love this.
Just take a second to really process the central mystery here. How on Earth, or actually scratch that, how in the universe does an entity identifying as a goddess of beauty from Venus wind up wielding a katana in the blood-soaked streets of 19th century Japan? It's a massive leap, right? This sets the stage for a bizarre 500 million year journey from the stars straight into the Edo period. We're not just hopping centuries here, we are hopping entirely different states of being.
Looking at Chapter 7, titled The Venusian Goddess of Beauty, we're going to map out the internal logic of this highly intricate spiritual cosmology and see exactly how this entity defines its own monumental existence.
The sheer scale of this timeline is, well, it's staggering. We're talking about a gap of hundreds of millions of years. It kicks off roughly 500 million years ago on Venus. Then, there's this massive chronological leap in the recorded memories, dropping us straight into 18th and 19th century Europe as a friend of the famous writer Goethe. After that, right into 19th century Japan as Okita Soji, and finally, a present-day incarnation right here on Earth. Talk about a cosmic resume. The crucial starting point is figuring out who this entity was at the very beginning. The text gives us this direct quote, "I was the goddess of beauty on Venus." That right there is their primary identity, their anchor. Everything about this soul's journey is rooted in that one core concept, aesthetics. But, as we'll see, that definition of beauty is going to undergo some serious stress testing once they're forced off their homeworld. Now, according to the readings, 500 million years ago, Venus wasn't the toxic, boiling hothouse we know today. Not at all. It boasted a highly advanced, highly aesthetic civilization. The entity notes they possessed a refined, physical body. And there's this delightfully specific detail in the source text where they explicitly clarify they were absolutely not some sort of ugly toad or warty alien creature. They were physically beautiful, living in an environment perfectly tailored to high aesthetics. But of course, that utopian setup didn't last. The source material describes massive, catastrophic volcanic eruptions on Venus that literally displaced its inhabitants. And this brings up an incredible contrast. Think about the profound culture shock these Venusians must have felt arriving on a primitive Earth. Imagine going from the absolute pinnacle of refined architectural beauty to a planet this entity remembers as overwhelmingly dirty and red, just entirely unrefined. I mean, it was a total environmental and aesthetic downgrade. The original Japanese source texts document these claims directly. It maps out the entity's memories of this incredibly jarring transition from 500 million years ago, detailing that stark realization that this new, dirty, red planet was gonna be their new home. It's just a fascinating look at how this spiritual narrative frames the deep, deep past of our own planet, but through the eyes of an unwilling cosmic immigrant. So, faced with this muddy, unrefined new world, what exactly does a displaced goddess of beauty do? Well, they don't just survive, they develop a mission. The text lays out 3 clear steps here. First, they resolve to retain their high Venusian aesthetics, absolutely refusing to lower their standards to match early Earth. Second, they decided to continually reincarnate, specifically to teach the concept of beauty to humanity as it evolved. And third, and this is wild, doing this was part of fulfilling conditions for Earth to eventually join a sort of intergalactic coalition, like a space United Nations. In this context, beauty is literally a metric for planetary civilization. As humanity evolved, the entities started executing this mission through various past lives. Way before reaching Japan, they claim to have incarnated in Western history. The readings note a life as a literal knight on a white horse, which embodies that classic, romanticized European ideal of chivalric beauty. Later on, they incarnated as a close friend of the legendary German writer Goethe. You can really see how these lives just constantly circle that central theme of romanticism, high art, and classical aesthetics. But then, the narrative takes a really sharp, unexpected turn. We move from the poetry and romanticism of Europe straight into the Bakumatsu period, the final years of the Edo period in Japan. Now, this was an era defined by extreme political upheaval, violence, and the clash of swords. So the big question is, how on earth does a former Venusian goddess, whose baseline is refined elegance, translate their mission of beauty into one of the most violent warring eras in human history? This leads to a fascinating redefinition of beauty. In Edo, Japan, the entity's aesthetic mission didn't show up in architecture or painting, it manifested in action. The concept of beauty evolved into a graceful way of living and dying. It became entirely about the relentless pursuit of masculine aesthetics and that terrifying, precise beauty you find in masterful swordsmanship. It's the ultimate samurai code, where absolute dedication, lethal grace, and an honorable death are seen as the highest forms of art. And the text shockingly reveals exactly who they were during this time. Their immediate past life, right before their current one, was none other than Okita Soji. If you know your Japanese history, you know Okita Soji was the legendary, tragic genius swordsman of the Shinsengumi who died super young of tuberculosis. The idea that a delicate goddess of beauty from Venus evolved into one of history's most famously lethal swordsmen is just a stunning narrative pivot. It really suggests that, for this soul, true beauty became synonymous with fleeting perfection and martial absolute. Bringing it all the way to the present day, the text gives us some really interesting details on the entity's current Earth incarnation. They actually chose to be born male in this life specifically to keep conveying this evolved sense of masculine beauty they perfected as Okita Soji. Interestingly, they initially studied architecture, maybe a little callback to building a beautiful society, but found it just didn't suit them. Today, they deeply revere the author of these texts, and in a brilliantly relatable twist, they admit to being huge fans of the historical figure Sakamoto Ryoma and the modern pop culture icon Kimutaku. It's this amazing blend of grand cosmic origins and very grounded, relatable pop culture tastes. Which brings us to the end of this incredible timeline, leaving us with a really profound thought to take away. Just look at this journey. From a pristine Venusian paradise, to the romantic courts of Europe, to the bloody snow of Kyoto with a sword in hand, and finally down to modern-day Earth. It forces us to ask, if you had to carry your own definition of your highest ideal, whether that's beauty, justice, love, across 500 million years and entirely different human cultures, how would it evolve? What exactly does true beauty mean to you, and how much is it shaped by the world you're forced to live in? It's a genuinely fascinating narrative from the source material, and for sure something to chew on until next time. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a totally fascinating concept, the cosmic origin of Earth's architects. We're going to unpack a highly detailed source text that actually bridges the gap between cosmic evolution and modern urban development. And we'll do this by tracing the wild journey of one single soul across the solar system. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of the text, I want you to think about something. Where does humanity's drive to build these massive, climate-controlled megacities really come from? Is it just, natural human progression? Or, as the material we're examining today suggests, could it actually be an ancient survival instinct brought here from a much, much harsher world? Keep that in the back of your mind, because the answer our source gives is absolutely unexpected. Our roadmap for today is a book called Messages from Outer Space. Basically, this text documents what it presents as the past lives and cosmic origins of various extraterrestrial souls who are currently living right here on Earth. It lays out this really complex taxonomy of alien types, reptilians, Pleiadians, the whole shebang, each with their own unique histories and specific reasons for being here. We are zeroing in specifically on Chapter 8, which focuses on the alien from the moon, who was formerly an octopus-shaped Martian. Now, the source material presents a structurally rigorous, internally consistent premise that follows a soul's transition from an ancient Martian cephalopod to a lunar being and finally into a human. We're going to decode exactly how this text logically connects these three completely distinct phases of existence. All right, let's start with the ancient physical form of this soul. The text describes an octopus-shaped Martian. And no, we aren't talking about a regular earthly sea creature here. The source defines this entity as a massive 10-meter-tall cephalopod-like being. According to the narrative, these guys inhabited Mars in the distant past. And this specific biological form, it wasn't a random accident. It was a highly specialized adaptation, absolutely required for extreme survival on their home planet. To really get this, we have to juxtapose the ancient environment of Mars with what we see around us on Earth today. The source describes ancient Mars as a world plagued by incredibly violent, extreme climate fluctuations. It was an environment actively hostile to surface life. So when you contrast that chaotic, violent environment against the highly controlled, beautifully stable urban spaces we build on Earth today, well, the overarching thesis of this chapter really begins to click into place. Because to survive those brutal Martian conditions, these 10-meter-tall entities couldn't just hang out on the surface. The text explicitly states they were forced to flee underground and into the deep oceans of ancient Mars. They literally had to engineer their way out of extinction by mastering subterranean and aquatic living. This intense crucible of planetary survival is exactly where their unique skill set began to forge itself. So the crucial point is this. What happens to an entire civilization that's forced to build massive, life-sustaining structures underground and underwater? Well, they get incredibly good at it. The text highlights some very specific Martian technological talents: advanced architecture, unparalleled spatial design, and total mastery over extreme climate control. And underpinning all of this is just a profound tenacity and a deep-seated survival instinct. They didn't build to make things look nice, they built to stay alive. Now, this entity didn't just hop straight from the ancient oceans of Mars into a human body on Earth. The text outlines a very clear three-stage transit. It begins in the ancient era on Mars, moves to an intermediate stage on the Moon, and finally arrives in the present day on Earth. According to our source, that intermediate stage took place at what we can basically call a lunar way station. The text describes a massive, shared alien supply base located specifically on the far side of the moon. To them, it wasn't just some desolate rock. It was a bustling, highly developed hub used by various extraterrestrial souls before they made their final descent down to Earth.
And what exactly was our former Martian octopus doing at this lunar base? The source is super precise about this. His soul resided there, working as a construction manager. I mean, think about how perfectly that aligns with the internal logic of the text. He used those ancient Martian architectural talents, the spatial design, the infrastructure planning, forged in the harshness of Mars, to oversee the architecture and development of these massive structures on the moon.
Right, so that brings us to the present day. The soul has reincarnated on Earth. But the text doesn't say he's a famous architect right off the bat. Instead, it provides this fascinatingly specific detail. This soul is currently living as a cameraman, and his initial earthly role involves investigating people down in Okinawa, Japan. The source positions this current life kind of like a temporary stage, a way of observing humanity before executing a much larger plan. So why did this highly skilled lunar construction manager pack up and leave the moon for Earth? The text cites two main reasons. First, a cosmic event referred to as El Cantara's descent, which essentially drew a bunch of extraterrestrial souls here. And second, a fundamental, deeply ingrained drive to alter and beautifully change the landscape. That ancient Martian instinct to build and control environments, it's still completely active within him. Which leads us to his ultimate earthly goal. The text reveals that in his next phase, or his next reincarnation, this soul is aiming straight for Tokyo. He wants to be directly involved in the architectural beautification and massive urban advancement of the city. He is perfectly aligning his cosmic background of managing massive supply bases and surviving extreme climates with the development of one of Earth's greatest megacities. So you can see the architectural evolution of this soul happening in three distinct steps. First, mastering spatial design just to survive the sheer hostility of Mars. Second, utilizing those hard-earned skills to manage structural bases on the moon. And third, arriving right here to guide Earth's urban beautification and development. The ancient past is literally explaining his present-day earthly motivations.
But there's a really fascinating catch here. Even with all our human pride in our giant skyscrapers and sprawling cities, the text points out that these reincarnated souls actually think Earth's space technology, especially in Japan, is severely delayed. From the perspective of a soul that used to run a massive lunar supply base, our current technological level is seen as surprisingly far behind.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this explainer. According to the internal logic of this source text, the drive to build Earth's future cities comes from the ancient survival instincts of Martian octopuses. What we perceive as a purely modern human endeavor, urban development, climate control, spatial design, is in this narrative actually rooted in a desperate, cosmic fight for survival millions of years ago.
So I'll leave you with this final thought from today's explainer. The next time you're walking through a megacity, looking up at a massive skyscraper, or navigating your way through a complex underground transit network, ask yourself, based on the fascinating text we just explored, are you looking at the pinnacle of human ingenuity? Or are you actually walking through an ancient Martian blueprint? Thanks for joining me to explore this remarkable source material today.